This is the first part of our two-part episode on The Return of the King by JRR Tolkien. This is the third and last installment in our Lord of the Rings read-through, and we're more than happy to welcome friend of the pod, Nathan Schmidt, a true Renaissance man, professor, podcaster, and musician, and his presence resulted in, dare I say, one of our most fun episodes. There's a lot of great riffs in this one, and I'm happy for you guys to hear it. I will say that perhaps because of our slow read-through, The Return of the King suffered the most this go-around. On this episode, we discuss the pressure of Tolkien to wrap up his epic story, the tragedy or distinct lack thereof as we get into, and whether or not the Scouring of the Shire is a good chapter. So Tolkien heads were a bit controversial on this one, but I do think it's one of our most fun episodes. So as always, we hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Ooh, man, coming in hot here for a recording at the fires of Mount Doom. That's right, guys. Welcome back to the Infinite Library. As always, I am your host, the Elf Lord John.
And I'm your host, Hobbit Ben. And we're happy to welcome a gentleman and a scholar to the show to discuss The Return of the King, Nate Schmidt.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to live up to both gentleman and scholar, but I'll do my best. But hello, I'm Nate. I am an assistant professor of English at Indiana State University, managing editor, one of two co-managing editors of the video game criticism collective Gamers with Glasses. And I would say that I don't want to jump the gun and get into it too fast, but I would say that Lord of the Rings was probably the books that like got me into books. Like when I was 9 or 10 years old, like Lord of the Rings was like kind of my first real, I picked this for myself. I want to read this myself. My parents didn't tell me, to read this. I found it on my own and played a major role in my life for sure.
Nate, you jumped to my first question, which we've been asking, which is what's your history with the big man? And it sounds like you had an early history with him. So
this is probably like my 15th time reading these books. Nice. I would have, but it's been a while. It's been a long time since the last one. And I read one perhaps mistake that I made is I read my really nice illustrated editions with the Alan Lee illustrations, which meant that I didn't want to mark the pages or underline anything. So if I say like in that one part that I can't remember a lot, that's why. It's because I accidentally read books that were too nice.
Just imagine you holding it reverently, sort of with both hands.
It is. It's a reverential artifact of mine, but I'm sure we'll get into this more. I would say with a decade or so of literary criticism under my belt, it did read a little bit differently this time. And I think each time I come back to it, I learn more things. I see more things. But I also find there's some stuff that I'm surprised I didn't feel more critical about the first time that I read it. I guess maybe I'm not as thoughtful, haven't been as historically thoughtful or maybe my love for the story was just clouding my judgment. But wow.
Well, I mean, I'd be surprised if you at 9 years old were saying the Easterlings were not rendered as well as they could have been.
No, but I mean at 25, 25 or 26, I feel like. Anyway, reading it through this time, I did continue to find I'm not totally sure that this is comfort reading anymore necessarily.
Oh, great. Okay. That sounds excellent. I can't wait to get into that. But first, one other preliminary question. What faction in the Lord of the Rings universe are you? As John said, they're an elf lord. I'm a hobbit. Nate, what is yours?
Oh, I'm fully with the Ents. I'm fully on the side of the Ents. We're going to stand around and be peaceful and lonely and made out of wood until absolutely forced into action. And then once we are forced into action, though, our fury simply knows no bounds. But no, I mean, I've always just loved the idea of tree guys that walk around.
Yeah, we did a lot of talking about the Ents in our Two Towers episode. I think we're all big Ent fans here.
Yeah. I love the part in this one where they catch back up with Treebeard, and Treebeard's like, "You want another sip of the good stuff?" hey, Merry and Pippin. See, you're looking a little taller.
And then he says, like, almost like, since he does it so many times, "Let me know if you heard of my wife." like he says it like just, even though like it's clear that he has no intention, like he's never gonna find him. He just says that to Merry and Pippin as they're leaving after they have a little pint, essentially.
I do also I love that. Yeah, they say like Merry and Pippin grew like 3 inches, and I imagine like them going back to the Shire. It says that they were like always riding around like in their finery from Gondor, and I was just thinking about like how them just towering over like literally everyone else in the Shire, like 3 inches, but just everyone just like being like, "Oh my god, can you believe how tall and lordly these 4'11" guys are?"
Because, like, seriously, if you woke up tomorrow and you were 3 inches taller, like, how different would your life really be? Like, 3 inches. Like, well, I just don't know.
I think again, when you're 4'7".
That's true. Proportionally, yes.
Well, John, you got to think that those inches is why Meriadoc is known as the Magnificent at the end of the book. Is that all it took was those 3 inches. So
I also like to think that they didn't just grow 3 inches in height; they grew 3 inches in something else. If you know what I'm saying.
I was just kicking that joke around in my head, and I really appreciate you lifting the burden of the ring, like the one ring that was going to be that joke. You went ahead and you were the Gollum and dove into the Mount Doom for me there, and I really appreciate that.
That's why he's Meriadoc the Magnificent, Ben.
Well, yeah, they are like a gentleman
thing around.
Yeah, well, they also just they have parties all the time. Like, instead that all they do is just throw parties and just ride around. Like, they're like gentlemen adventurers or something. But
well, they're the only two who have a good time. They're the two who don't have to go to Mordor.
Yeah, they don't have PTSD.
Suffer under the shadow of death.
Yeah. They don't have PTSD and all the horrible stuff that happens. So
I feel like Pippin in particular gets off kind of easy. Honestly, by the end of things, like Merry, has to watch Theoden die, and I think it goes by really fast. But I think Merry and Theoden do have like a sweet sort of relationship. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pippin is just kind of like, I'm around. And like, this is, I sure wish Merry was here is kind of like the worst thing that happens to Pippin. I feel
and then he befriends like a small boy.
Yeah. Like, he gets to be the prince of the halflings. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, at least Pippin, like, I feel like when we read them, like in books 1 and 2, he's always just saying dumb shit and Gandalf is like yelling at him. So I guess he like stops doing that, which is nice, but
Yeah.
I mean, really, I think they were one of my favorite parts of this book. I mean, some of that is that we get so little from some other characters that we grow to like over the like. There's frankly kind of an astoundingly small amount of like Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf in this book because it's very focused on Aragorn, Sam, Frodo, and to a lesser extent Merry and Pippin.
And whenever Gimli does say anything, it's to passive aggressively remind Merry and Pippin what a pain in the ass it was to search after them. I noticed that this time. I hadn't noticed that before. Gimli, every time he gets an opportunity to, he brings up how irritating it was to have to go hunting for them all over the place.
Yeah. So I was telling John this. I feel like I'm like, all right, the boys are back. There's going to be some great riffing. But yeah, it's Gimli just like, man, you really gave me a huge headache when I thought you were dead. And then like like there's no riffing, and then they have to rush through that so they can get to everything else that has to happen. And it's like, yeah, I felt like I was robbed of a cool hangout scene. So, but
I feel like, at risk of wandering prematurely into paratext, I feel like there are a lot of elements of the sort of visual adaptation of this world that have been explored that were not as fun as the ones that they could have explored. Like, I want to see the movie that is like Gimli going to Fangorn and Legolas going into the caves, and just these two bros hanging out, checking out stuff that they didn't think the other guy was normally going to like. I think that that would be a good sort of like buddy road trip comedy film that I'm disappointed we haven't gotten to see.
Yeah, I like the bit where Legolas is like, a cave that an elf will go into, but not a dwarf. Well, wonders never cease.
Yeah. Well, and that whole
Never
part too, Legolas is like, I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
yeah, Legolas is just like, and this is for the dead men of Dunharrow. Legolas is like, I'm not worried about any of this.
But I'm also not going to go out of my way to do anything particularly helpful. I'm just going to remind everyone that this doesn't bother me periodically.
Guys, I promise I'm totally not scared.
Tell everyone I'm not scared. Yeah. I gotta say that, like, I guess, well, let's do the plot summary and then we can jump all over the place, because I want to talk about the dead men, but let's just do a quick plot summary. So I'm going to keep this very quick. I don't want to spend too much time. So if you're not familiar with The Return of the King, starts Pippin and Gandalf are heading to Minas Tirith. We find out that the steward of Gondor has gone a little crazy from looking in his orb too much. He treats Faramir like shit. And they're basically the armies of Sauron are descending on Minas Tirith, with like the capital of Gondor, essentially. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas go through the paths of the dead to recruit the dead men of Dunharrow. They arrive at the siege of Minas Tirith with corsair ships and the men of the south. Aragorn basically saves the day. Meanwhile, the muster of Rohan has been traveling to arrive to give Gondor aid because armies of Sauron are descending on Minas Tirith. This all happens at exactly the right time. Eowyn kills the Witch King of Agmar, who we got to talk about. Theoden, as we've alluded to, is unfortunately slain, but the king has returned. And so the battle goes so well that they basically are like, well, we're just going to distract Sauron at the Black Gates so that Frodo and Sam can deliver the ring. And also at one point, Legolas hears a gull, which I wrote down. It's very, very important to be related. Sam rescues Frodo. Frodo thinks Sam is a thief for a second, which is kind of a tragic scene, but they eventually give the ring back to Frodo. Sam does. They get to Mount Doom. Frodo tries to take the ring and is stopped by Gollum, who bites off his finger and falls into the pit, thus completing almost accidentally the quest. The Eagles show up at just the right time to swoop Frodo and Sam, literally. Everyone shows up in Minas Tirith, and Aragorn heals everyone. Aragorn marries Arwen. Faramir marries Eowyn. Eomer becomes king. This is basically like a marriage comedy ending. Everybody then heads back. We find out that Saruman has unfortunately more or less tried to industrialize the Shire, so the hobbits take it back in a battle. In the confrontation, Saruman is killed by Wormtongue, and Wormtongue subsequently gets killed by hobbits. As we've alluded to, Merry and Pippin become tall gentlemen adventurers with huge penises. Sam marries and gets elected mayor 6 times and uses the soil from Lothlorien to fix the trees. Frodo eventually sails to the Grey Havens, to Valinor, to basically find peace from his PTSD and his death. And then Sam does so eventually in ? I wrote. And then if you want to pursue further story threads, you can adventure into the appendix, which I hope we'll talk about. Anything? Did I miss anything?
So I actually was the evil elfin character who jumped in here and added the question mark, because I don't remember Sam sailing away at the Grey Havens eventually. Did I miss that?
Well, so it's in the appendix. It's not in the actual story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But Sam does go west and just leaves his family.
Yeah.
And his wife and many children just fatherless.
Well,
and
he's
so
the mayor for
be
6
with his real love, Frodo Baggins. Finally,
but he gets to marry. He's mayor like 6 times. I think he's really old. John, were you going to say?
I was about to say. I feel like the implication is that he like lives out like a fairly long life in the Shire, and I'm guessing his wife like dies, and that's when he's like, oh, my wife is dead, my children all grew up, time for me to go find my gay lover in the Elysian Fields.
A kind of Grace and Frankie situation. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I will confess, I didn't quite make it as far into the appendices as I would have liked to on this read, but you guys can fill me in, I'm sure.
Well, so like, I feel like I just want to, we can talk about this briefly and then go wherever we want to, but I feel like there's this tendency when I read Lord of the Rings to go like, well, I know Tolkien knows what happens. And then you start reading the appendices and you're like, holy shit, there's so much stuff in here that I don't care about. And so you're like pouring through the appendices. You're like, what the fuck happened to like Sam basically? And like, you're like looking at all this like tertiary data that I'm sure everyone like loves. And I'm just like, I want to know what happens to all these plot threads. And I feel like that's an experience like I've only had replicated in like Infinite Jest, where like there's like a maze of footnotes that have ending stuff and some other books, but it's a weird experience to just sort of wade through tertiary materials to try to figure out what happened. And I don't know if you guys had a similar feeling or something like that.
Yeah, Ben, I was about to say, like, I feel like as much as I've ragged on like the kind of wikification of like contemporary fantasy fiction, I actually feel like Lord of the Rings is ironically a great candidate for wikification because there's so much information that's in like tertiary sources, some of which were never officially published.
Yeah.
That like, I don't want to go have to track down like JRR Tolkien's like 5th notebook he wrote on the can, when he was like 72.
Yeah.
But I do want to know like, oh, what did he say about like this Valinor?
Right. Yeah. Or like, and like, there's a lot of like dwarven history, which this time reminded me of like, remember the Alamo, like where they like fight really hard to get like Moria back. And then everybody that this dwarf guy hires is like, we're not fucking going in there. And then there's like still like a Balrog inside it. Like it's crazy. Anyway. Yeah. Like there's a lot of like wiki stuff that kind of happens in the appendices. So yeah, but I agree.
Did Tolkien write the first wiki, like the fan wiki of his own material, like of his own work? But because the appendices, I believe, were they supposed to be published with the text? Because Christopher came along afterwards and published a bunch of notes and stuff. That,
I think they were, because I mean, I can only think of one example of this happening in the text, but in book 6. When Sam is like spying on the orcs, there is a footnote that refers back to the appendix where like the orcs say like,
that's right,
Orcas.
The orc word. Yeah.
I was like, that's a weird thing to just have at this one particular moment in this book and literally nowhere else.
Well, and for Sharky, because it's like orc for old man. There's a footnote for that too. Yeah.
But that one didn't make you flip back to the appendix.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I do think they were published, and I think that again it makes, I don't know if I want to say it makes sense, but like in the broader context of the work, like we start off, Ben and I spent a lot of the first episode talking about concerning hobbits and kind of what a strange choice it is to like frame this epic narrative with what is essentially like an ethnographic sketch written in like contemporary academic style.
Yeah.
And then the appendices really kind of feel like they are kind of bookending that kind of academic style language from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And kind of closing that loop with a similar motif.
It's interesting because he also says like the narrator in the final couple chapters of the book says that Bilbo goes in and writes more notes at some point. But I also love the part where he mentions Frodo having the book with a bunch of crossed off titles that like you couldn't decide what to call it, which I feel like is very much just like a I really wasn't quite sure what to call this thing, which is, I've always kind of been a little bit befuddled about that. Like, and I realize this is not maybe a Return of the King question so much as it's a question about the whole entire thing, but like I have a hard time thinking of any other fantasy or sci-fi story that is as similar, as popular as this one, that's as popular as this one, but that's named after the villain, that's named after the bad guy. That's not in some like ironic way, like, oh, right, we came along afterwards and we rewrote this and now the bad guy's the good guy, right? Like, but like I can't think of another. I don't know. Just at the end of the day, I think the Lord of the Rings is actually a very strange name.
Well, and I believe, according to Wikipedia, he wanted to call it the War of the Ring, because that would be like, that's like the events that transpire in this book. But then I think the publisher said he couldn't do that for some reason. So I don't remember what that was, but.
That's interesting, because you can definitely see, and I'm not going to be the first or the most informed person on this topic to point this out, but like the shadow of World War II and World War I and Tolkien's own wartime experience is just all over this, from that feeling of like right before the battle, it's waiting for it is worse than having it actually happen. Yeah. To all that stuff Gandalf says about like, no matter what happens today, Gondor as you know it is no more. Like whatever happens tomorrow, you're not going to live in the same Gondor that you lived in today. Or even in there's a period of time when Minas Tirith has to have go blackout. Basically, they can't have any lights, just like Tolkien would have experienced during the bombing of Britain. And I don't know. A lot of people point to the Dead Marshes as like this is Tolkien's trench experience. This is where the World War stuff gets into it. But I kind of saw that all over the book, definitely throughout this. And the like, oh, well, now I'm home and it's not really home anymore too. I think that's an experience that's shared.
Yeah, no, that's something I found myself thinking about a lot. I have spent a lot of time over the last like year or two reading about kind of World War I and kind of the pre-World War I world and kind of the experience of that change. Yeah. And obviously, World War II happened more contemporaneously to this book coming out, but I think World War I is what I find myself thinking of a lot more, just in terms of kind of the enchantment of the world before the war versus the dramatic lessening of the world after.
Well, and like when they find the tree, the sapling of the white tree after Aragorn becomes king, Gandalf just says the third age is over. Like basically like he's like, we're done now with that period of history, and now we're in the fourth age. So, and
he also concludes that this means that he no longer has anything meaningful that he needs to worry about, because he explicitly says like, well, my job was to kick Sauron's ass. And now that that's over, which I didn't even really personally do, but now that that's done, it sounds like the Shire is like a mess right now. And I'm going to foreshadow that so hard. And then I'm just going to go talk to Bombadil for a long time and leave you guys to clean that up yourself. It's like explicitly what Gandalf says. He says, I'm done helping. I'm going to go hang out with Tom. And like,
It's the Mr. Spock Simpsons meme. My work here is done. But you didn't do anything.
Well, was he at Tom Bombadil's house like basically until Frodo had to leave? Like he's just hanging out with Goldberry for like however long that was, and then he's like, "Well, I'm gonna leave with Frodo now." Like, it's
time to
go. We talked a bit about kind of the shift in Gandalf's character between, his literal reincarnation in the Two Towers. And I'll be pretty frank, like I found him a kind of, I didn't like spending time with Gandalf in this book. Like he seems to have, I guess maybe humanity isn't quite the right word, but there's some element that is is really missing from him, and I feel like maybe that is deliberate. But yeah, this isn't the fun, like, charming Gandalf we met at the beginning. Like, this is someone else.
Well, and there's that part where he's like Pippin has to basically not give anything away to Denethor, and then Gandalf is like, I'm really sorry that we kept you between two old men like that or something. Because like they were both just like quizzing the shit out of him, I guess, or like he had to let that happen, and like Pippin didn't give anything away because Denethor is trying to figure out where the ring is, basically. But yeah, like I don't know, the Gandalf is almost like an agent of the plot in the Return of the King in some ways, as opposed to like, I don't know, his more interesting shades in the other ones. So
yeah, I mean, even just like when he like tells them like at the Shire, like, you have to go do this yourself. Like, it's not the way it feels like he would have said that before, where it's like, oh, sorry, I have to go about and do my wizard business.
Right.
It's not for you to question, little hobbits. But it's more like, yeah, guys, I'm done. I'm tired. I'm out. I know that. Hey, trust me, like, this is going to be no big deal. You guys are going to take care of this, no problem. I'm out. Like, it very much felt like your manager at work, like, leaving you to close up for the night.
Yeah, you got this, right? You're good.
Yeah,
I got like a thing I gotta get to.
You're good to mop up
all day.
Yeah.
yeah. I gotta hang out with my like stoner friend. We're just gonna smoke weed at his house.
Exactly. I feel like periodically Tolkien kind of forgets to write characters, though, like that he has these lapses where, like, because Gandalf, I think, is a beloved character for a reason. And I think he's an important character for a reason. And I think that the Gandalf of The Hobbit is like this really memorable, like totally fleshed out, easy for me to, like, if I imagine this character in a totally different situation of my own devising in my brain, I can still say exactly what I think he'd say and do. Right. Yeah. But then periodically, like, Tolkien just forgets that characters are supposed to be able to do that. And he'll just be like, and now this character, and now Name showed up and did thing. And you know why Name did thing? Bloodline. Name did thing because Name had good dad, and that's kind of like Prince Imrahil, for example, is like, on the one hand, I remember when the movies first came out and being just outraged at Peter Jackson for ignoring this character who's like at the center of saving everybody's ass in Minas Tirith over and over again, and who ends up actually being briefly in charge of Minas Tirith while Faramir's still indisposed. Yeah. But now on this read, I'm like, man, like, this Imrahil guy is just like, well, he's the Prince of Dol Amroth, and that's what he does. Like,
and he's a cool guy for doing that. Yeah,
he's like, real cool. Yeah. But I feel to a certain degree like Aragorn is kind of like that too, at least in this book. There's so much potential there in that, like, that totally, like, mysterious ranger character coming out of nowhere and assuming his rightful throne. Like, could have been such a complex character moment, but instead it's just like, nah, well, the key fit the lock, so now it's open. Now the door's open, right? And that's kind of like, I don't know. He feels flat to me.
You know, it's something. You know, again, I keep saying, you know, this is something we've touched on in previous episodes, but I'll get to my thoughts on why that might be later. But you know, Aragorn is a character who, like, I feel like should have, like you said, Nate, a lot of feelings. Like, he, like, you know, Ben and I joked in our fellowship episode, like, when we first meet him, like, he's a wook. Like, he's this dirty guy who loves smoking weed, hanging out at the bar.
He's like sitting in the corner with his pipe. Yeah. So,
you know, and he, you know, knows he has like a bloodline, and he's carrying around the sword to be reforged and everything. But, you know, it feels like there is I don't know what I want to say, there's reticence, but it does feel like there's a lot of potential for complexity there. And there's a lot that Tolkien does in terms of the way that he is referred to in the text that I think speaks to kind of the evolving nature of his character. You know, we first meet him, he's Strider, and then Strider gradually becomes Aragorn more and more frequently. And then in this book, a lot of the times it's just the king. Yeah. Like he has made that transition fully. And it feels like Tolkien gets so lost in kind of his ideas about like the world being righted, about eucatastrophe, I guess we'll say, not to drop the E word too early. But it's kind of this thing where it's like he has a role to play. So guess what? He's going to do it perfectly. And he's not going to have any complicated feelings about that. And in fact, even like his relationship with Arwen just feels like it gets cleaned up so tidily at the end, because Tolkien does not want to leave like any actual like hanging threads before he wraps this thing up, which is crazy because then there's like 6 appendices.
Yeah.
Well, and like you get the Arwen stuff in the appendix, and also you find out that Aragorn has like more names. I feel like his character just exists to have names. Like he's known by like Throngil at one point because he was like helping out like Rohan and Gondor, and then he's like, I will return. Like basically like I don't know. There's something about his character is like to exist to have names for people, as opposed to like, I don't know, maybe whatever his interiority would be as a result of this. So
imagine how different this book is if Throngil is one of the main characters. Just like every 2 pages, Throngil speaks up, and we're expected to take that seriously.
Like, yeah, who's that? I'm probably butchering the name. I'm gonna find it because I literally was reading the appendix and I was like, who's this guy? And then I realized it was Aragorn, and I was like, whoa, like, you know, because he had like another name. So,
but I think. You know, George R.R. Martin's really famous critique of Tolkien is what was Aragorn's taxation policy, which I think is an incredibly irritating, incredibly George R.R. Martin type of thing to say. But I do think that he is right to critique. Basically, what he's critiquing is, and I think he says this too, like Tolkien presumes that all you need is for the ruler to be a good person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if the ruler's a good person, then I don't need to elaborate anymore, because we know that the government is going to be fine, because that's been handled by the fact that we've put a morally upright person in charge. This is obviously a very interesting time when like it is powers mostly resting in the hands of the morally depraved.
Right.
But nevertheless, like, I think it is worth questioning what some of Tolkien's motives or interests may have been there. Like, does this book have a politics that is coherent in a way that doesn't just rest on like morality?
Well, that makes me think of like if Tolkien was riffing on like Arthurian romance, and even there though, like Lancelot sleeps with Arthur's wife, so there's like this kind of more moral complexity there that like it seems like we could say he was riffing on King Arthur, and King Arthur was a good king because he's like the chosen one, you know, as opposed to anything else. So yeah, like I can see that kind of being a sort of like morally pure equals good, you know, leadership by the standards of Arthurian romance or something like that. But
I mean, what really struck me in this book, to kind of piggybacking on that, Ben, you know, for all that is in this book about, the how war can be like alienating and horrifying and whatnot. Again, and coming from the perspective of a man who actually did do that thing. Like, I've never fought in World War I. I probably couldn't have done it. JRR Tolkien, hey, you got me there, buddy. But there's so little tragedy in this book.
Yeah.
Like, I found myself thinking and realizing not a single member of the Fellowship dies except Boromir, who only dies because he's kind of a bad person.
Yeah.
Well, and he's a man who's not of Numenor stock, also, importantly.
Yeah. And I found myself wondering, like, that doesn't feel real to me. Like, the Fellowship gets split apart, but no one actually loses anything of value in, among our kind of like main, I guess, 8 guys at that point. Like other people lose something kind of, but the only like kind of really important characters who die are these old men.
Yeah.
And,
and Tolkien is.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. They die how?
They die in this way where it's like, oh, this is their time,
right?
Yeah,
like it's not even particularly like Theoden wasn't presumably going to last that much longer, even if this hadn't happened. And if anything, he might be a little jazzed that he gets to go out like in something of a blaze of glory.
Right? Yeah, the last ride. Yeah.
No, there's. I feel like Tolkien. There's a part of him that almost wants to get there. Like he keeps building narrative tension. And I actually think he's good at putting his characters in interesting, perilous situations, but he's terrible at resolving them. He builds these interesting moments where Frodo and Sam look at each other and go, wait, we're on an active volcano and we're out of water and we're exhausted and we've got like 2 more little granola bars left. What the hell are we going to do? And that's like a really interesting problem that then the fact that gets solved with the goddamn eagles is just like, it makes him deserving of all those eagles dropping the ring into the volcano memes that came later. Right. It's just so frustrating.
Well, also like regarding Lost real quick, I do find when Saruman says when it's revealed that he's the one behind the scouring of the Shire, like his threat is quite chilling, where he basically says something like, I hope I managed to make here. It says, still, I have already done much that you will find it hard to mend or undo in your lives. And it will be pleasant to think of that and set it against my injuries. Like Saruman actively wants to cause loss and tragedy, like at least to the hobbits, but he doesn't because we have magic elf powder that makes all the trees grow back. Like, exactly. So I don't know if I say this, John, Nate, I found this stunning, like, depiction of the scouring of the Shire where they painted it from like this bird's eye angle where you can see literally everything that's happening in the scene. So all the characters look really tiny and like the Shire just looks fucked. And just like looking at like the fucked Shire and seeing like the corpse of this wizard and like this guy gets shot down in the street from like this really long perspective. It's like this could have been like a really like brutal scene. And like you're saying, he gets there, but then the characters manage to undo all of it, thankfully. But yeah, like it could have been just like, man, we won and now we've ruined, like everything's ruined. So, but
well,
yeah,
and it's so strange because the whole thing throughout this whole book is, and when I say this whole book, I don't just mean Return of the King. I mean the whole saga is like, oh, an age is ending. Like the world is being lessened. Like the world at the end of this will not be. We're not returning to the glory of the past. Like something is passing away. But don't worry, all the guys you like, they're just fine. They're all gonna get out of this scot-free. Their hair on their head will be hurt. Like no one even really gets hurt. Like Frodo's wound that like is bothering him at the end. It's the wound he got at the very beginning of the story.
Yeah, Weathertop. Like, yeah,
and I'm not saying like I wanted him to get hurt worse or something, but it's kind of like, okay, well the biggest consequence for him happened 700 pages ago.
Yeah.
There's something like, that happens when Gandalf comes back that I think shifts the whole narrative where you're like, oh, none of this is actually dangerous.
Oh, like when he like Gandalf the White. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That when, because I genuinely do, because it was like a formative moment for me. I remember the first time I read about Gandalf dying and didn't know what was gonna happen later. And that was like an experience, an emotional experience with an imaginary person that I don't think I had ever experienced before. It was deeper than any other stuff that I had encountered. But then when Gandalf reappears, it's just like, I guess pretty much everybody's going to be fine. Right. Except for Boromir, which again, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to parse through in my head is like, to what extent does Tolkien invent plot armor, and to what extent is plot armor something that other fantasy writers come along and do later, like out of imitation? Is that one of the zillion ways in which the Lord of the Rings is getting imitated later on, or is that just like something that is endemic to the idea of writing fantasy at all, is that you have to have chosen ones who can't die? And it took George R.R. Martin to desecrate that altar, and even then, not really, because it just turns out Jon Snow is the chosen one who can't die. Yeah.
Even he's not actually immune to it. He just wants to make you wait for it a little longer.
Well,
and stew with the idea that maybe there isn't a chosen one, but that's a whole other thing. I hate the way that story goes, and I hate that we find out Jon Snow has been a secret special boy this whole time instead of a man with complex emotions who has to learn to deal with the circumstances of his birth.
Yes. Well, okay, I think it's worth asking then, like, are these two ways of like making fantasy real? Like the idea that fantasy being escapist literature has stakes, characters can die, because Auden, the poet W.H. Auden, in his review of what he wrote when Return of the King came out, he wrote on the whole thing. He says somewhat disparagingly of genre fiction. Where is it? Hold on. Oh, yeah. In most cases, however, the objection must go deeper. I can only suppose that some people object to heroic quests in imaginary worlds on principle. Such, they feel, cannot be anything but light escapist reading. That a man like Mr. Tolkien, the English philologist who teaches at Oxford, should lavish such incredible pains upon a genre which is, for them, trifling by definition, is therefore very shocking. And so the idea that you can only make escapist literature real by having all this, detail that we've talked about in previous episodes, or you make fantasy real by just saying, oh, this guy is not a chosen special boy, we have to kill him. I wonder if you have to have some escapist thing, and for Auden at least, you're making it real by detail if you're not having real stakes, and then maybe somebody like George R. R. Martin makes it real by having what appear to be real stakes. Although, as you said, John, maybe some of them get walked back for the fantasy element or the escapist element. So I don't know. It seems like those two are related, I guess. So
well, I think that when I think about what in this book really I found myself wearying of a bit, and I want to preface this with kind of the fact that I feel much more critical of this volume than I have of the others for a lot of reasons. But I still had a good time reading this. I still think it's a book that is worth reading. And I think, you could make an argument that it is in fact canonical, regardless of what patron saint of the show, Harold Bloom, said.
We're making it canonical right now. Yeah. We did it.
But what really doesn't work in this book for me is, again, I think we'll talk more probably about the eucatastrophe stuff soon, but it's the ways in which this book feels like the one where Tolkien is doing the most pastiche rather than inventing something new.
Yeah.
Again, we've talked a lot about Ben. This is the template on which modern fantasy literature, for better or worse, was built. Everything that has come since this series has in some way, been paying homage to Tolkien or responding to Tolkien in one degree or another. That's everything from George R. R. Martin to Michael Moorcock to the schlockiest, dumbest D&D spin-off novels. It's
no, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
But this is the book where it feels most I am reading a guy who is very self-consciously trying to write his own version of the Iliad or the Song of Roland, or King Arthur. The prose gets, significantly more stilted and awkward as he's trying to reach these kind of epic heights. The characters feel less characterized and more just vessels for their bloodlines to do heroic deeds that'll resonate through history. The pacing gets weird. Again, we have these big battles and then everything just wraps up and we get these, all of a sudden we're in kind of this weird moment where like things feel kind of cartoonish again, and we get, like you said, Ben, a marriage plot out of nowhere, and then the Scouring of the Shire, which I frankly hated as like just this kind of weird epilogue where everything gets resolved so easily. Yeah, I mean, it's still strange. It's still like interesting on like just a textual level. Like, why is he arranging things this way?
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like a guy who is like captured lightning in a bottle the way that those first two books do so much of the time. It feels like a guy who is doing something that is self-consciously imitative in a way that I found much harder to enjoy.
Nate, you look like you have something you want to say to that, so I'm gonna pass the ball to you.
Okay, well, okay, because I think it's related actually to the quote that you brought up, Ben, as well from Auden.
Yeah,
which is and like I think for the most part I agree with you, John. Like I am not interested in playing apologist for Tolkien, and particularly for The Return of the King, which I do personally feel like is probably the weakest of the four, including The Hobbit. Although I've always been a big Silmarillion fan, so I don't know what that says about my critical judgment. But what I was thinking about, Ben, as you were reading that quote from Auden, is the types of literature that Auden would have had in mind when he was saying, hey, like, it's amazing that somebody would go through this much trouble to make a story that of this type. And because if you want to talk about plot armor, like, let's talk about Conan the Barbarian, right? Like, let's talk about Robert E. Howard, right? Or Alan Quatermain, right? Like H. Rider Haggard, like these sort of really horrible, for the most part, adventure novels that are generally like super racist, super colonially minded, but also like the point is that this Nietzschean Superman, like Conan, like is at the middle of it all, who is never under threat, who's all John Carter of Mars, is another example. There's this Superman in the middle who's always safe because he's just the biggest, baddest, buffest guy in town, you know? And that was the genre. Like that was what Auden was responding to when he was saying it's crazy to basically see somebody taking an adventure novel, an adventure story, and putting all of this philology into it and doing all this work. And so I guess in comparison to people that he probably did not think of as his predecessors, Tolkien was doing something a little bit more complicated by even having hobbits in it at all, much less having the hobbits be an important part of the story. But again, like, that doesn't earn him big, great big boy brownie points. It's just like, I think that is an interesting, it's interesting and worthwhile to think about not just the Lord of the Rings as a thing that's at the genesis of fantasy, but also as a thing that is kind of at the end of the era of what was often just called the boys' adventure novel. That was often how people refer to it. They were often like published in what were called boys' magazines. Yeah,
like pulp stuff.
Yeah, like these kinds of stories that were kind of had their origin in Edgar Allan Poe and Jules Verne and other like early writers of what we'd call genre fiction. Mary Shelley, although like Frankenstein is obviously like better than any book that we've talked about at all on this episode by like orders of magnitude.
Yeah, Nate's like, why didn't we read that?
but you see what I mean? Like to the extent that Tolkien is answering a genre that has, for the most part, been made of what I would argue are silly, reductive cartoon characters. There is, I think, a way to give him some credit as Auden is doing for doing a little bit better than they were doing, even though he's obviously like not setting up like the type of world that Ursula Le Guin or Philip K. Dick or like an amazing, writer was going to come along with actual complexity and bring in later.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't totally disagree with you there, Nate. I feel like, though, I mean, I'm sure Tolkien was to some degree familiar with that kind of story, but I don't know that it's actually what he was writing in response to. Like I said, I think that he's much more writing in, like, he's not writing in that tradition. He's not responding to that tradition, I don't think. I think that, again, he's writing in response to Arthurian romance and mythology. I'm not saying that like he wasn't maybe trying to like in some way write like a good version of like a fantasy story, if that's what it was before. But this is I think that calling this like a response to like Conanish, like Nietzschean Superman style pulp is not quite what I would say, because I like when I read this, what I find myself thinking is this is a guy writing his like equivalent of epic poetry. Like he is writing his version of Le Mot d'Arthur, rather than like something that is maybe meant to be in like this continuity with contemporary literature in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm thinking about it in terms of what Auden was saying, though, and I'm trying to imagine what it's like to be in 1950 and not be J.R.R. Tolkien and be reading these books and going, what does this remind me of? No, I don't think Tolkien had read Robert E. Howard, probably, but I think that in the moment, it's just interesting that Auden goes, well, there's all these silly other stories that exist, and it's funny to see somebody work this hard to make one.
Well, and I should say Auden, I think, is responding to naysayers, because before that he says, nobody seems to have a moderate opinion. Either like myself, people find it a masterpiece of its genre, or they cannot abide it. And then he talks about the hostile ones, because he says, I must confess, some of them have literally judgment I have great respect for. And then when he says that, he goes, they think it's just escapist reading. And then he says, well, it's crazy that he would take so much time making this escapist stuff feel real. Auden likes it, but I think it's interesting that, like, because we were talking about comparison to George R. R. Martin, it's like, if it's escapist, like, we don't want to be reminded of like the stakes. And so I think Tolkien makes it real in another way, but I think you could make it escapist, by killing somebody off that you liked, and that might make it seem more real while still being escapist. I don't know. I feel like that's an interesting tension there. And again, I think Auden is responding to the naysayers in that quote rather than trying to like line up the two. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I think that where I keep coming down is like, I don't necessarily want it to be realer. Like, I don't want this to be like, quote unquote, like gritty realism. Like, I think that,
dark.
To kind of refer back to, I know we talked a little bit about the movies at various points, but like, I think that where those movies feel weirdest is like when they are trying to make things like look realistic in a way. But what I want is an element of tragedy. Like the way that this book, again, it'd be one thing if throughout this whole book it was a sort of this thing where it's like, oh, we're gonna beat Sauron's ass and we're gonna restore everything to the way it's supposed to be. But that's not what it's been. It's been this mournful like thing about, oh, the world is changing, everything is getting less, and we can't do things the way we used to. We're not like our fathers. We hardly look like them. And then at the end, like there's no tragedy for the characters. Again, Frodo, we could talk about Frodo's kind of tragic element, but even then, like, it's not, he doesn't have like a tragic flaw. Like his sadness is not because of some weakness on his part, or because of like the result of anything he did wrong. Again, throughout most of the series, such as it is, the characters, maybe because the stakes hadn't quite reached their heights, the fact that like, oh, I don't know like what Legolas's relationship with his mother is like didn't bother me. I didn't need to know that. But then we get to the end and all of a sudden like everything is like inflated to this tremendous level. And all of a sudden like I want Aragorn to have, you know, tremendous melancholies and tremendous mirths.
Yeah.
A la Conan.
Yeah.
You know, I want this person to not just be like a robot of the good king. Like I want him to be a human being the way he seemed at the beginning. And Tolkien, I think because he is like consciously imitating these modes of literature that were not meant to give interiority, that were meant to just be like suck jobs to, you know, your patron nobleman's family, you know, his long father, that goes out the window. And all of a sudden like these people don't feel human, even if they were human in, again, kind of a somewhat distant way. You know, again, like I said, we don't get like the interiority of like, oh man, you know, what was it like for Frodo growing up as an orphan in Hobbiton? How did he feel about having to move in with his uncle Bilbo when he was only 50 years old?
That'd be weird. Yeah. Okay. Also, I want to read, just for the record, an example of this like pastiche we're talking about, just so it's on the record. I'm going to try to do an affected voice for this. This, then, was the end of the debate of the lords, that they should set forth on the second morning from that day with 7,000s, if this might be found, and the great part of this force should be on foot, because of the evil lands in which they would go. Aragorn should find some 2,000s of those that he had gathered into him in the south, but Imrahil should find 3,500s, and Aramir 500s of the Rohirrim who were unhorsed, but themselves more worthy, and he himself should lead 500s of his best riders on horse, and another company of 500 horse there should be, among who which should ride the fuck, I can't even do it now. I'm cracking. Like he goes on there for like the whole paragraph. Like 2,000. Yeah, like come on. Like and there's not a, like I would say there's not a ton of it, but that sticks out so much compared to the other stuff. And it happens every so often. Like then when there's the whole Faramir Arwen thing, it's like the Lord Faramir was walking alone in the garden of the houses of healing and the sunlight warmed him and he felt life run new in his veins, but his heart was heavy and he looked out over the walls eastward. Yeah, it's very stilted. So, but
yeah, well, and it's strange because it's something where like I've praised Tolkien over and over again in the series for like, oh, he doesn't like get super bogged down in like minutia. Like he doesn't have to explain to us how Gandalf casts spells. He doesn't have to explain to us like why are there evil trees that, you know, just kind of wander off and fucking attack people? why is Tom Bombadil there living in like a cartoon house? And you know, that being the parts of this, you know, the parts of this book that I tend to love the most, is the parts where he just like lets it be. And then we get to this thing and it's like, oh, I need to make sure you know exactly how many hosts of men Prince Imrahil was leading,
right,
and how many were lost in this action. And especially like I do feel like something I've realized on this read, Tolkien actually, again, not great at writing battles in a way that really works. I mean, he can maybe write like fights pretty all right. Like the confrontation between the Witch King and Éowyn like is pretty legitimately thrilling, even if kind of the resolution comes a little out of nowhere, actually.
Well, she cuts that the crazy lizard wing thing, just one stroke cuts his head off. Yeah,
I remember, like, I don't feel like the prophecy was set up enough to really have that feel like a big twist.
I mean, it was straight up. It's Samus, like it's Samus from the first
Metroid,
the first Metroid game, where at the end it's just like, hey, you know what the big old surprise was waiting for you at the end? It's a lady in the suit. I just
to be fair,
I can't.
30 years before that game came out. So really, if anything, Samus is a riff on Éowyn.
the Samus to Éowyn continuum. Yeah. I don't know. No man could do it. That part, it's good.
again, it's fun. It's fun in the same way, like when you watch Macbeth and it's like, oh, like that's what it means when the forest like walks.
Right.
That could be fun. Even if it maybe sometimes is a little bit.
Well, yeah, and then Duncan gets to say Duncan from his mother's womb untimely ripped, and then Macbeth is like, fuck.
That's exactly how that scene goes. I remember now. Fuck. Burnham Wood came to Dunsinane. Fuck.
To kind of reel us back in just a little bit, because I feel like we got away from the point I was trying to make.
Yes, we did.
I don't want the listeners to feel like we're just kind of wandering too much. Tolkien, like, not actually great at writing battles in a way that feels particularly thrilling. He keeps falling back on logistics, because I don't think I can't fault him for this necessarily. Like, he didn't fight in like a cavalry, charge type war. He was in World War I, and it's very hard to like translate that experience of warfare into kind of this knights and orcs combat. He did not have like personal experience with this kind of thing, so I think he has to fall back on that earlier literature to kind of figure out how to write that kind of a scene. And
it's like you had said, it's a lot of waiting. Like, his experience of battle was waiting and like being uncomfortable and like trench warfare.
Well, so, that's the stuff that like works. That's the stuff that I liked reading. But then when we get to the actual fight, like, I kept finding myself thinking back to Two Towers and how we don't see the Battle of Isengard. We get there, it's already done. And we just hear about it in character from Merry and Pippin. And I found myself thinking, like, man, I wish that was just what was happening now. I wish someone was showing up here and it had already happened and they could just tell us in a couple paragraphs, and then we could move on with the stuff that he's actually good at writing.
Yeah. Well, and Nate, maybe you experienced this, but John and I talked before you got on that I don't know if the Return of the King holds up for like separate reading, like we do, because we read them fairly spaced out, and I feel like for me at least, the Two Towers stood out the most in that regard, because I felt like he was doing a lot of interesting stuff, but the sort of burden that he has to do with this, the battles, wrapping up plot lines, having like the king prophecy happen, makes this book kind of suffer, I guess, when read separately. And I wondered if you experienced that, because we did ask you to read Return of the King, and I was like wondering, I wonder what Nate thinks reading the third book last, or like, after not reading it a while. I wondered if you experienced anything like that, or like, because I wonder if that has something to do with it, where like suddenly you notice, like, man, he's not very good at some of these things, and this is him needing to wrap up this huge project he's undertaken. So
I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I always enjoy coming back to these books because they were really formative for me, but I did not enjoy reading it as a standalone thing, and I did not have time to go back and actually start the trilogy, which is also 6 books, which also really he wanted to be 1 book, but like from scratch. I didn't have time to do that, and I found myself bemoaning that several times as I was going through the book. I was like, man, I really do not like this as much as I like it as the end of those other 2 books.
Right.
/4 books /2/3 of 1 book. But like, I think that, I wonder if there is a sense in which the appendices kind of are evidence of Tolkien maybe just not quite being ready to be done. Like, if Tolkien himself had maybe taken on, like, just imagine, how much of his life and how much of his time had gone into this story and into this world. Like, I think that he had set up so much stuff to the degree that, like, Sam was ready with magic sand to go around, that he'd gotten like in the previous volume. He was ready with magic sand to go around and save us all from Saruman's industrial revolution. Yeah.
Oh, horror.
But I found that just reading it by itself, it does kind of feel certain elements of it feel kind of perfunctory. And I don't think it's just because I remember those things so clearly from past experiences with the story.
Yeah, and it's like, and this time I ended up getting more into like the what is it, the Pukul men and sort of these like weird unexplicable things that like are not everything else that has to happen, because I was just like, I want to find out more about these stone guys. like what's up with that? Like I felt like he was doing like a Stonehenge thing, and like I don't know, I was more interested in the periphery reading it, as we've been talking about, because there's some of this stuff just doesn't quite work on its own, I guess. So
yeah, I agree with you there, Ben. I found myself, reading about like the Pukul men and Gambarigan and just being like, I'd love to find out more about what these guys' whole deal is. Because like they're from like before like the first ships from the West came.
Yeah.
So like they're humans, but they're like a totally like unrelated like branch of humanity from the most of the people we see.
And like the Druidain are like, they help out Rohan, but then like Tolkien just goes, and nobody ever saw any of them ever again. I was just like, come on.
Well, and there's this part where I have like serious reservations about Gondor and the Pukul men, and like the way that I feel like, whether Tolkien means this or not, they read as kind of indigenous coded to me.
Absolutely.
But in a very like cartoonish way. But when Gondor has this, where he talks about counting things. Mm-hmm. He has this thing about counting things. It's almost a throwaway line where he's like, yeah, I've counted all the leaves in the trees, and I've counted the blades of the grass, and I've counted the stars in the sky. And it's like this, that's a really, that is a character I'd like to spend more time with. Like the guy who just wants to be left alone so he could count everything in the forest. Like that's an interesting, I agree, at least, that I too found myself looking more to the periphery as I was reading this time.
Yeah, like, and I also feel like just with the pickle, man, I flagged this one sentence where it says, here they labored in the dark years before ever a ship came to the western shores or Gondor of the Dunedain was built, and now they had vanished, and only the old pickle men were left still sitting at the turnings of the road. Mary stared at the lines of marching stones. They were worn and black. Some were leaning, some were fallen, some cracked or broken. They looked like rows of old and hungry teeth. He wondered what they could be, and he hoped that the king was not going to follow them into the darkness beyond. I don't know. There's a nice like implication of just like things older than we know right there, which to me was the stuff I liked a lot from the first two books. And then we got to get to the plot beat, so we have to leave that behind. But
or even like the like weird statues that Sam and Frodo find when they're in Cirith Ungol that have like 3 vulture heads and are like possessed. There's a lot of cool statues, but it feels like we keep getting these little interesting tidbits, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got to get to more plot. Sorry.
right. Yeah.
We can't let things breathe. And I mean, I think part of it is like, I remember when I picked up my copy of Return of the King, and you look at it, and it's basically like about the same size as like my copy of The Two Towers here. So you're picking it up and you're expecting like, okay, a book of roughly the same size. And then you realize how long all the appendices are.
Yeah.
I had someone, I was reading this week, and someone was, I knew was like watching me read it, and they were like, oh man, it looks like you have a lot to go. Are you going to be, ready in time for recording? And I was like, oh yeah, don't worry. Like the last 200 pages are like appendix. I'll be done with the story like in 200 pages. And I mean, I'm not saying like I don't want the appendixes there, but it really does feel like this story like needed a little extra space to breathe here at the end. And I don't know kind of where Tolkien's limitations came in. I don't know if he just, I mean, as someone who writes fiction, from time to time, I get it. Endings are hard. Endings are always hard because they're the thing you get the fewest amount of chances to practice at, regardless. They're difficult. It's difficult. And I can't totally fault him for like not being able to stick the landing on something this big. I mean, again, not to keep bringing him up, but like George R. R. Martin is not finishing those books because he knows he cannot do it. He knows that if he even tries, he will only make everyone mad instead of just me.
Well, I actually would stand up for the last sentence in the book, which I think is masterful. But yeah, it feels like in attempting to end up all of this, get all these balls in the right spots. Yeah, it feels rushed. So I agree. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.